Kingsmead, The First 25 Years, by Doris V. Thompson. Chapter 1. Preliminaries. It was on the evening of October the 10th, 1933, that the great decision was made. A new private school was to be founded, the future Kingsmead. For several years before, I had had it in my mind to open a school of my own. Plans were beginning to shape for this when, in 1930, I was deflected from my purpose by requests that I should become headmistress of Rodine School, Johannesburg. After much deliberation, I accepted this call, but in the event it proved to be but a postponement, and in 1933 I found myself free to revert to my original idea. In September 1933, with the support of my father, Mr. Handel Thompson, and at the urgent request of friends and prospective parents, I began serious investigation into ways and means. The only capital I had was in the form of 5 acres of land at Hyde Park Estate. At that time, Hyde Park Estate was not readily accessible. There were but 1 or 2 isolated houses in the vicinity. The 5 acres were bare felt. Nevertheless, the first plan was to start there with the minimum of buildings, hoping to rent a house nearby for accommodating staff members. But the interest aroused as the proposals became public and soon put all such plans out of the picture. Several promising properties were inspected, and one in Oaklands seemed a very favorable proposition. Just at the last moment, only a week or so before the meeting called for October the 10th, Mr. Westgate, the estate agent, telephoned to say that he had an attractive house and grounds just come onto the market. Would I like to see it? Almost I refused. My father, too, remarked most truly, "It is no use going on and on looking at properties every time they are offered us." However, we went and found ourselves at a little house named Kingsmead, set in 5 acres of ground. This was part lovely garden, a prize-winning one made by the devoted labours of Mrs. Pink, and part, a large part, orchard with a paddock for horses and old stables at the back entrance. Before another month had passed, Kingsmead, the home of Mrs. Pink, and before that of Mr. Quinn, became Kingsmead College for Girls, Melrose. The meeting on October the 10th had been called at the Carlton Hotel, Johannesburg. The manager had asked how many were to be expected, and he had been told 12 or 2 probably, not more than about 30. And so a small sitting room on the 2nd floor had been set aside. By the time we arrived, this room was full, and people lined the corridor outside. Hurriedly, the authorities moved us to a large writing room nearby, and there, at length, the founders of Kingsmead met on that never-to-be-forgotten evening. The chairman was Mr. Handel Thompson, supported by Mr. John A. Moody. I spoke of my hopes and plans for the school. Mr. Moody explained that there was no money at all, only those 5 acres of land at Hyde Park, which I owned, and would give to the school. He explained that a mortgage could probably be raised on any property bought, but that in addition much would be required. It was proposed that this should be obtained by a debenture issue of £12,000, each debenture of £100, bearing an interest at 6%. Such security as could be offered in the form of a second mortgage on property, furniture and fittings would be obtained for these, but obviously all money lent in this way must be lent on faith. The preliminaries over, 2 papers were circulated, one for the names of prospective pupils and one for promises of debenture money. When these were collected, it was found that 33 boarders, 25 day girls, were tentatively enrolled, and £2,350 was promised. This seemed to all to be sufficient to clinch matters, and unanimous and enthusiastic vote decided the issue. And so Kingsmead was born. We went on to talk of the property at Melrose, of the feasibility of getting enough building done by the following January to make possible the opening of the school, of the uniform already sketched out by Miss Rawson and me, of probable staff members. None of those who were present on the night could ever forget the warmth and sincere cooperation, the sense of sureness that this was a right decision. There are moments that live in the memory. This night was surely one of them. It is commemorated year by year on October the 10th with deep thanksgiving and festivity. There followed weeks of concentrated effort. The purchase of Kingsmead was confirmed and a mortgage of £4,500 raised on it. Our architect, Mr. Roger Martin of Reed Gardner, later Reed Martin, Murray and Telford, met me in the grounds, and even before the property was ours, we were sketching out the building that was to be, planning not just for the moment, but for the future. The little rondavel in which we sat no longer exists. It was just in front of Kingsmead House, a rough table in the centre, and a plank all round for a seat. It served later for many a term as a classroom, and what a draughty one too. Eventually it was degraded to the sole purpose of stacking garden chairs. I see it, leaking and dishevelled, as the background for the needlework stall at the Grey Mistress Fete in 1951. After that, it gradually disintegrated before our eyes, and it was demolished unmourned, except by the few for whom it held sentimental memories. The part of the school to be embarked upon, first in readiness for January 1934, was drawn in the form of an H. The next step was to cut down the orchard and build the south arm of this H. This was to be the dining room on the western end, and above it the first dormitory. Beyond it, along the southeastern end of the H, was to be the shell of a future second dining room. To begin with, it would be unceiled and divided by 2 temporary walls into 3 classrooms. At the end of the crossbar of the H, and standing out slightly on the south side, were the kitchen and the pantries. Oh, the noise through those unsealed rooms, the flies in that first term from heat and new paint, the irritation of each classroom being a passageway for the next. Mrs. Nethersole writes, amusingly, of our early rooms. Even the official classrooms might not have passed all the bureaucratic standards. There was the long narrow room, later a staff bedroom, in Kingsmead House, where one looked down the room as into a cave, lit by a thickly yellow light that came through primrose curtains. There was the curtainless room, later prefect's study, where the class sat with hats perched on the left of their heads to keep off the sun. There were the 3 classrooms partitioned out of the junior dining room, and the second partition did not quite fit into the middle of the window, so that one could always hear the whole of the next door lesson, or even peep through the gap if the mistress were not vigilant. There was the dripping of the tap in the old Kingsmead kitchen, also a classroom. Yes, and many more such memories. Nevertheless, all are so good to look back upon, the sense that difficulties were there to be surmounted, the joy of every tiny improvement we could introduce, the excitement in the second term of the year to find a ceiling to put in, and a new dormitory built above. But all this was to come. In those October days of 1933, it was still a paper scheme. Our builder, Mr. D.F. Corlett, set to work with a will. It was to be no easy task to get all that first section completed in the short period allowed. On November the 4th, 1933, the first sod was turned. Would it be ready by February the 1st? And then the floods came. Oh, how it rained. We could not get the building dried out. At the last moment, the opening day had to be postponed from February the 1st to February the 6th. Nevertheless, it was a grand achievement. Besides architect and building, there was equipment needing attention. Tentatively, Miss Rawson and I ordered 50 desks from Messrs. Duncan Bain, flat-topped, please, with plenty of legroom, one desk to one pupil. We ordered exercise books, pencils, pens, stationery of all sorts, blackboards, chalk, chairs, 100 to begin with, beds for boarders. Carpenters were busy making cupboards for boarders' clothes, wardrobes for staff bedrooms, lockers for bedsides, and much else. Shelves here, there, and everywhere. There were curtains to be made, 30 for the dormitory cubicles alone, not to mention window curtains for all the rest of the rooms. Divan covers, too, for staff bedrooms, were a big consideration. There was china to be chosen, cutlery, and hundreds of odd things. And still, the applications rolled in. 50 desks became 75. 75 became 100, till we had to close the lists at 136. With more, we could not cope. By November, we realized that our buildings would be inadequate, even in the first term. It was then that Mr. Hull's house came into the letting market, and we succeeded in obtaining 7 pines on a short lease for the junior school. The sanatorium consisted of one room in Kingsmead House, and the sister was one of the matrons of the school, prepared to add this to her duties when necessary. Transport of the day pupils presented a problem that we had hoped not to have to face at that stage. But the expense of hiring a bus and driver proved so prohibitive that we embarked upon a bus of our own. It held but 20 and had 2 straight plank seats down either side. Occasionally we put a bench down the middle of it and squashed in some extras. For all its defects, by present-day standards, it seemed to us palatial when it was driven in on the last days of January. Its green and brown paint, the name of Kingsmead displayed in gold letters along the side, somehow gave proof at that moment that the whole strange fairy story was true and that Kingsmead really was in being. The girls were spread over all classes from the kindergarten to post-matriculation. Not the easiest way in which to start a new school. It might have been a sounder proposition. It would certainly have been an easier one to restrict entries in the first place to juniors only and to seniors up to 14 years. But there were peculiar considerations that seemed to demand the more ambitious program of a fully extended curriculum from the beginning. And thus we launched out into the deep. End of chapter 1.